time it's been having informative conversations, bringing you joy on your journey home with the music, and of course, traffic updates as well. Speaking of traffic updates, please, if you see anything on the roads, let us know on the WhatsApp line 061 798 1075. Like I mentioned, we're continuing the conversation this afternoon. The Office of the Tax Ombud, and representing them is Francois Viljoen, and we're going to be diving into the conversation, or rather continuing with the conversation from last week. As you recall, we chatted with Russell Mabolo, and a very good afternoon to you, Francois, joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. How are you feeling, sir?
I am doing very well. Thank you. How's things on your side?
Fantastic. We have just had a phenomenal conversation, a very informative one, and now we're going to be continuing the same energy, and this time diving straight into the conversation, of tax matters and how to ensure privacy in with regards to tax matters. And so jumping straight into it, Francois, now we've seen that the tax ombud cannot intervene in a matter before a court of law or decision made in court. Maybe just tell us why this is the case. Are there perhaps instances where the tax ombud is unable to interfere?
Yes, that is indeed the case. So we have to bear in mind that the Office of the Tax Ombud is there to provide a cost-effective mechanism to address administrative complaints that taxpayers might have with the South African Revenue Services. And this services that is provided by the Office of the Tax Ombud then also runs jointly with any other existing mechanisms that is available for taxpayers. So the tax ombud therefore has certain limitations due to the fact that in certain circumstances there are existing avenues that is available for taxpayers. And there will be four instances where the tax ombud cannot intervene, and that will be in cases where a taxpayer asks the office to change legislation. The Office of the Tax Ombud cannot change legislation. There is an appropriate platform for that. And usually, when we look at tax legislation can be amended on a yearly basis. And usually, taxpayers and also the professional bodies in the tax field do give inputs to National Treasury regarding tax legislation. So that is already an available avenue for taxpayers, and the tax ombud cannot get involved with changing legislation.
Mm,
Although I can just add that the Office of the Tax Ombud annually also makes proposal regarding tax legislations.
yeah,
A second
we're chatting.
case, yes.
No, please continue, Francois.
A second case where we cannot intervene is in cases where a taxpayer is aggrieved by an income tax assessment or any assessment for that matter. And
Yeah,
that will typically be where SARS issued an additional assessment. Now, in those cases where SARS has issued an additional assessment, there is already an existing process in place for aggrieved taxpayers, and that is for a taxpayer to lodge an objection or an appeal. And again, we cannot get involved in those cases, except
yeah,
for cases where SARS is then not finalizing that specific objection or appeal within the specified time frames as per legislations. And then, as you've indicated, also in cases where the matter is in front of any of the courts with which we have, and ultimately a court will take a decision on that. So just to highlight, the office is more there to provide a cost-effective mechanism for taxpayers to deal with their tax complaints.
mm. Joining us, of course, is Francois Viljoen from the Tax Ombud office. And last week, if you recall, we chatted to Russell Mamabolo. We covered things, like the purpose of the Tax Ombud and how they can help you with your tax complaint against SARS, and also really dived into how or why it's important to complain when SARS is treating you unfairly. And of course, like I mentioned, Francois is continuing the conversation this afternoon. Now, Francois, it's often, said that tax matters are private. Why are they regarded as private, and how can we ensure privacy in this regard?
That is a very important question. And
Mm,
firstly, I can highlight that taxpayers do have a right to expect that any information that is provided by them under any of the tax acts is treated in confidence, and that that information will not be disclosed to any third parties, and that that information will be used solely for
yeah,
tax purposes. Now, this is also then a right that is also then catered for in the Tax Administration Act to ensure taxpayers that their information is protected and private. And since this is legislated within legislation, if SARS is not adhering to that legislation, it
yeah,
is opening itself up for a criminal offense. Now, there's also further, there's a reason why in South Africa, where we have this legislation to protect taxpayers' information, and that is also for South Africans to be encouraged to register and make full disclosure to SARS regarding all incomes that they receive. Now, we do find that if a taxpayer does not have that guarantee that the information is protected, they might not be as forthcoming with all their income that we would hope for them to be. So, as part of government, the Office of the Tax Ombud also then takes this right of taxpayers very seriously when they lodge complaints with our office.
yeah,
And even all staff at the Office of the Tax Ombud are obliged to take an oath of taxpayer secrecy and not to disclose any information of taxpayers. And like I've said, if this is not adhered to, there will be serious repercussions to taxpayers. I can also point out that should any taxpayer become aware of any taxpayer information illegally, they are also compelled by the Act not to disclose that information. So it is definitely something that the office takes very seriously, and I can ensure taxpayers that we do take all the information serious.
And that's actually very, great and reassuring to know, especially, as a taxpayer. Francois, are there any instances where complaints are rejected? And what would be the reason to reject complaints by your process? If you could please share with us.
Yes. So prior to lodging a complaint with the Office of the Tax Ombud, there is a specific process that taxpayers needs to follow. And that is a typical process that is usually the case with most ombuds offices, whereby you have to first complain to SARS about the issue that you're experiencing. Now, the SARS complaints office where you have to complain first is called the SARS Complaints Management Office, or in short, it is called the CMO. And they will have a turnaround time of 21 days to resolve a taxpayer's complaint. Now, failing to do so, a taxpayer is then allowed to lodge a complaint with the Office of the Tax Ombud. So, in the majority of the cases that we reject, we find that the taxpayer would submit a service request to SARS and then immediately lodge a complaint with our office without having complained to SARS first. Now, in that circumstances, we will then be compelled to reject the complaint first for the taxpayer to lodge a complaint with the SARS Complaints Management Office. And After that, they can then come back to us for our office to review the complaint. And then, as I alluded to earlier, there are certain limitations where we cannot get involved with. And that will typically be your cases where a taxpayer is aggrieved by an additional assessment that was issued by SARS, and they still haven't lodged an objection against that additional assessment. And that is something they need to do first before approaching to our office. So that will be the majority of the cases where we reject the complaints.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Francois. And lastly, on our side, can you kindly please share the Office of the Tax Ombud contact details where taxpayers can contact you?
Yes, so we do have a call center with the number 0800-662837. Also, taxpayers can drop us an email at complaints@taxombud.gov.za, and they can also visit our website at www.taxombud.gov.za.
Fantastic. Francois, thank you so much for your time and that insight. Very informative indeed.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Until we chat again, keep well. God bless.
Thank you.
There you have it, a conversation from Francois. And